Here we are, the latest edition of the Huddle. We got Texas, we got Cancun, we got Vice President Harris, we got personality trumping politics, or is it politics trumping personality? It's all in the latest edition of the Huddle. Here we are. We're back in the Huddle. Last week, great discussion with Andrew Oak about the First Ladies. This week, though, oh my gosh, The Economist. Can we talk about Texas, the power grid? What the hell happened? And then Ted Cruz, the senator, deciding to take his family on a Mexican vacation. Don't mess with Texas.
Well, you know, Mark, when they say don't mess with Texas, I guess that applied to everybody other than Jack Frost. How are we still dealing with this in 2021, where we have a situation where we've got people freezing to death, we've got people without water, without power? That this seems like a very antiquated problem that shouldn't be happening in the year 2021.
I mean, Texas famously, their regulatory body, their electoral power generation is off the grid. They're totally separate. They're independent. It's truly a Republic of Texas situation. But, I think we go back a few years and remember those devastating floods in Houston. There is something weird about the infrastructure, the urban planning, just the general lack of preparation for these major events. And Texas is a serious state. It's over $1 trillion economy. There are millions and millions of people living there. What a black eye. From what I've read, obviously we don't have all the full facts yet, but from what I've read, they turn down the power in the winter. They don't have as much electrical generation. They don't use as much power, but the local utility never anticipated needing this much power, and the whole system came crashing down.
Yeah, you mentioned it, that Texas has long been the symbol for states' rights, for autonomy. It's actually written into the Texas Constitution as a state that they've got a plan for secession at any given time, as well as a pre-designated way that they might break into 5 separate states. This is, going back to their war with Mexico when Texas became a state. They always envisioned that they might need to be on their own, and that's why they have their own power grid. But that raises the big debate of states' rights versus the national support. That when you have this, what's the federal government going to do? In some cases, they're just not equipped to help enough.
The first job I had in D.C. was working for the Hammer, Tom DeLay, who at the time was the majority whip in the House of Representatives. He famously called me his token Yankee, to give you a sense of the don't mess with Texas mentality. And there is a bravado, there is a machismo that comes with Texas. As you point out, they're ready to leave the union at any given moment. Famously, the Capitol in Austin is taller than the U.S. Capitol, just to show how committed they are to everything is bigger and better in Texas. But I have to think that the machismo, this idea that it's a future power center, really took a step back, and nothing more glaring than the boneheaded decision of Senator Ted Cruz to take his family to Cancun.
All right, it's absolutely a bad look. I don't agree with this at all. The question that some people want to know, of course, is what is Ted Cruz as a senator supposed to do? Even in some cases, he might be in Washington. It's showing a total lack of awareness, but also it's showing this idea that we want our elected officials to be full of self-sacrifice, that they're there for the people they represent. That's really not always the case. This is not the attitude of some of the people that we put into office. And so it definitely is not going to help him win re-election. The question is, will people remember down the road? We remember Texas is already starting to tilt a little bluer than it has in the past. Beto O'Rourke had challenged Senator Cruz, but he managed to squeak by. Maybe this could be one of the big things that will be drummed up into attack ads down the road.
100% there's going to be attack ads around this. I think that, what is the role of a senator in this situation? We're used to natural disasters with all hands on deck, especially during a hurricane. So I think it was just quite surprising to see a senator leave in such a dire situation. Also, Ted Cruz is not a warm, cuddly bear. He's not the most well-liked person in DC. So all these kind of efforts compounded. But you're right, the state is definitely turning, shifting blue. The Democrat Texas party is out with a report this week suggesting that this kind of incompetence, lack of professionalism, the inability to govern is really going to hurt the Republicans. And we'll see in 22, just 2 years away, the current governor is up for re-election. So we could have an answer as soon as 2022.
Yeah, Governor Greg Abbott could certainly be hearing about this as well. And then I want to raise the point that while we don't know exactly what a senator would, should, could be doing to deal with this, one person who certainly might have been involved is a Secretary of Energy. We have not seen Jennifer Granholm, the new president's designee for the Secretary of Energy. We have not seen a hearing come up for her in the Senate yet. This is an example. I want to pivot a little bit. What's going on in Congress right now? I know you mentioned there's been a lot of clashes of personality. Are we governing yet?
It is interesting. I was on just reading the news and just listening to different reporters. I feel like there's so much coverage on politics and personality. Everything is like ESPN. It's all a horse race, who's up, who's down. Governing is not that, sexy. It's not that fun, but it's important. And I think we're seeing a real moment where you're right. Why don't we have an energy secretary? Why isn't the confirmation process being moved up? In fact, why isn't the Biden administration made a trip to Texas? You got to think that's going to happen.
I think they did announce the president will be headed to Houston. But at the same point, some of those symbolic visits, they're important, but these are a lot of people who are hurting. We're so used to seeing it in hurricane zones, not so much when it comes to cold weather, that you've got people sitting in the dark, you've got people with frozen pipes, you've got people without access to drinking water, without access to the food and shelter that they need. This is not the everyday occurrences. Texas is more prepared for a hurricane than it is for this.
It is interesting you bring up Granholm because you've got to think the whole that. I mean, obviously the Biden administration really wants to focus on this COVID relief bill, but right after that, they really want to focus on infrastructure. So, does this failure of the Texas energy grid help their cause to see more infrastructure spending? Is green energy going to be impacted? There was a lot of talk on the right that the windmills in Texas shut down, they froze. Granholm probably isn't that excited that this crisis happened before she's got a chance to talk about it.
This is certainly going to color her agenda going in on the first day. We saw recently this week Senator Chuck Schumer kind of lauding that he had his majority leader sign put up officially, and that there, like you said, there's a lot of personality, but it's also a question of some of these issues. There is a very divided set of agendas facing Congress. I know we've still got confirmations that are happening. We've got Tom Vilsack being confirmed for the cabinet. But again, is agriculture the big issue, or should we have moved up energy? And then at the same time, things like DC statehood are coming front and center because Democrats see this as a real opportunity to help bolster their numbers.
Yeah, in some ways, you're seeing a lot of kind of small ball politics, if you will. I mean, clearly, Texas has a bigger economy than Russia. It is a $1 trillion plus economy. We're very fortunate to have it in the Union. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, these are power centers. Austin is, a home of creativity and very interesting things happening in the tech space. The fact that this isn't, in my mind, front page news either shows you people just are sick of Texas and the bravado, or it's such an issue that it's so far away from the power centers of the East Coast that it's not getting attention. But the idea of like having a hearing on DC statehood before figuring out what the heck happened in an economy of $1 trillion, that should be top of mind.
Yeah, there are many different spokes on this wheel. I think that it's I know it's something you're going to ask our guest about later in the show, and I think that honestly, this is a big question about leadership. It comes all the way from the top, of course, but we've got many different aspects. I want to ask you about something I've been thinking about as well, which is about another one of the key leaders in this new administration, Is it just me, or are we really seeing a different role carved out for the vice president?
I've been really struck. Yeah, I think we're on the same page. I've been really struck. Kamala Harris had a private conversation with President Macron of France, which I found really illuminating. As we record this later on today, Biden and Harris will be speaking to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada. The last administration, or even going back to the Bush-Cheney grouping, I don't remember the vice president having this much front and center attention, almost joint appearances. It really seems like we're seeing a new either elevation or training of the vice president that we hadn't seen in the past.
Yeah, especially only 30 days into this administration, we're seeing a grooming effort for Vice President Harris. I think you should definitely ask our guest about this today, because I know he's seen some governments from the inside and covered them as a reporter. But one thing I'm wondering is this showing a lack of confidence in Joe Biden, or just an exuberant amount of confidence in Kamala Harris? And that, is this something that you're putting them side by side as they're doing like the national COVID tour with the National Guard and with different hospitals, as they're doing so many different appearances? This is hand in hand. I know the vice president's living across the street at the moment because of renovations at the Naval Observatory. But are they doing this simply because she's close by? Is she coming by in the morning and, good morning, Joe, I'd like to govern today?
I'm ready to go. I hadn't thought about proximity. That's interesting. I think Joe Biden's been in this town for a long time. I think he knows the job. I mean, I don't think he's surprised by that. I do recall when President Obama was in charge and Vice President Biden, he spent 11 days with then Vice President Xi Jinping over the course of a few years. Certainly there was thought that, Xi would be president someday and Biden would be president someday. So that certainly played dividends. So, having Harris, it's probably smart. We're in a very globalized age. Anything can happen. Conventional wisdom in DC is obviously that Joe Biden's a one-termer. So maybe all these factors are coming together. And let's face it, she's a very smart, capable, professional senator and should be in these meetings. We're living in a different age. So I don't know, maybe this is the new vice president.
I think the vice presidency is definitely one of the roles that we've seen maybe had its power ebb and flow through the years. That there have always been more siloed vice presidents and more activist vice presidents. So maybe this is just another spike in the power meter when it comes to their concentration of power in our government.
You're really loading up the puns today. I love it.
Oh yeah, it's
the power meter. You've come full circle, almost like a turbine.
It's a turbine, like the ones that fell out of the sky in Denver. More on that later.
Speaking of power ebbing and flowing, one question I'm going to ask our guest is, where's the power now? Capitol Hill, White House? Where on the Pennsylvania Avenue meter is it?
Why don't you tell me about our guest? I know you've got somebody great to chat with today who probably prods and dissects the news as much as we do here on the Huddle. Tell me about Dan Lippman.
Yeah, Dan Lippman will be our special guest today. He is with Politico. He has been a part in the past of the Playbook team. Currently, he's covering the White House and really all things in Washington, D.C. What's interesting about Lippman is that if you go to his Twitter profile, he's so into receiving news that most reporters just provide their email. This guy provides his cell phone number. So if you get a tip, call Dan Lippman. So yeah, we're going to have a good chat with him. Hopefully he'll give us some inside thoughts on what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Let's take a look.
Dan Lippman here in the Huddle. Thanks for joining us. World-class reporter for Politico, covering the White House and all things in Washington, D.C. How's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Good. Thanks for having me, Mark. It's going well. The news has slowed down a little bit, but it's still stuff happening every minute. So
are you saying you miss the excitement of the 45th president, Donald J. Trumpster? Do you miss the Trumpster?
I miss the exciting news that we were able to write about every day. But I think that, it's like a roller coaster. You can't be on it forever. And it exhausted the Trump aides as well. And so that's why so many of them were leaving all the time or getting pushed out. And so but it definitely felt like historic times. And this administration, there's less of that. It's more about the rebuilding phase. And so it's kind of feels like Obama a little bit after the Bush years. And so it's interesting to see how they're trying to roll back every Trump regulation, and they're keeping track of trying to make sure that they can put the liberal stamp on things. Although if they do that so much through executive action, then that makes it harder to cement those things long term, whereas legislation is much easier to keep that in permanent place.
So I've been joking on the Twitter that big media can't quit Donald J. Trump. Is that accurate? I mean, I don't know. I saw you wrote a story today, obviously, about the 2024 election, even 2022. Is media to be blamed for the coverage? I mean, is this guy still a force to be reckoned with?
He's still a force to be reckoned with, but I think I would shy away from blaming the media. We're only amplifying what society is telling us, and so you blame society if you want to. Media is part of society. There's definitely lots of page views still to be had via Trump. We saw earlier this week Maggie Haberman. She got a new beat, and it's still covering Trump. And she was one of the best Trump reporters out there, probably the premier one. I think as long as there's news to be had about what he says and people are still interested in it, then I think it's a fair game to cover. And so he's speaking at CPAC. He's going to be doing more endorsements, and that's kind of normal in terms of endorsements, but not attacking his successor so quickly after leaving office. There's generally a grace period of a year or two, at least.
So you guys having have there been internal discussions like around the virtual water cooler about the newsworthiness of Trump? Are we giving him too much attention? He is a former, but I guess it's interesting. He's a former president, but he's also the top Republican candidate for 2024. It must be hard to decipher how much coverage he deserves.
Yeah, after Obama left, there was much less attention, and he had already capped out at 2 terms. I think people are in every newsroom are discussing how much coverage to give to him. He is not dominating our website as much as he used to. I think if you probably search for Trump on the homepage, it was maybe a couple dozen on a heavy day, and now maybe it's 6 or 7. I haven't done the count, but we have a lot of stories on our homepage, and there's still Trump news to be had. But I think it's not like other media outlets. Sometimes they run like clickbait, which is
right.
HuffPost would have, I don't know, like celebrity stuff, and there is. I think we always try to move the ball forward, and so not just do standard stories, but kind of have scoops and features. Since I have a lot of contacts in Trump world, that has kind of ensured that I am still doing some Trump stories. But as time moves on, that will shift. But
is Team Trump being as prolific in terms of reaching out to you and other journalists, or are they stepped it back a bit? Are they taking a breather themselves?
I've reached out to Trump spokesperson Margot Martin, who's kind of like the Hope Hicks of 2021 versus 2015, and she has multiple times just said, off the record, decline a comment, and so they don't want to weigh in on every small little thing. And so on big stuff, when the Supreme Court goes against Trump, they will have a long statement, but they're not going to get dragged down in every detail of every Trump-related story, which is, I guess there's only so much, you don't want to overexpose yourself. And Trump, though, is always about the brand. Well,
speaking of overexposure, we're going to do a good pivot here. Senator Ted Cruz went down to Mexico in possibly, I think, one of the most bonehead decisions of politics ever. Can we just talk about, there's a serious humanitarian crisis. The energy situation in Texas, water, utilities, dreadful. Ted Cruz going to Mexico. what is going on?
Obviously, he was kind of using his dad brain more than his smart brain. Went to Princeton and was a champion debater. There was no evidence of that, of him utilizing those skills during that trip. And he claimed that he had misgivings the moment he was on the plane. And I guess then it's kind of too late to go home, and you have your daughters, and are you going to take your daughters off the flight? But it just seems like a staff breakdown as well, because whoever he told that he was going to Cancun, they either didn't tell their superiors, or the superiors didn't push back against Cruz, and so that's kind of political malpractice at its best. I did a story last week about how United Airlines is even looking into the leak of their passenger data, since some employee told the travel news website that he was going to come back originally on Saturday, and he had not mentioned what day he was coming back. And so obviously people don't want their personal information to be compromised, even to us in the media, but it might be hard for them to find that and to punish that employee, because that employee is kind of seen as a hero on Twitter.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting because is that employee at United Airlines a whistleblower? Is he a hero? It's almost a reflection too of just how much politics and personality is like seeped in to every bit of our culture. There were photos obviously that were snapped. I mean, you can't really stop that, but the fact that travel details were leaked, it's really amazing. Have you seen anything like this in your reporting career? So much politics all the time.
I'm only 30, and so I haven't been here forever, but it does seem like, I feel like politics is getting a bit of a breather now, but this was kind of an old-fashioned Washington scandal, and so people were very excited by it. There's cocktails named after Ted Cruz, and so I think with Trump off the picture a little bit, then people can focus on other politicians' foibles and mistakes and hypocrisies much more, and the scandal will last for a day or two instead of just getting overshadowed by Trump news 5 minutes later.
Let's talk about another kind of interesting story, once again from the Republican Party. This is a sidebar. The Democrats are so boring that they're, all the news seems to be with the Republicans. Can we talk about the Lincoln Project? The demise, the breakdown, they had these grand dreams. They raised tons of money. There was talk that maybe they would even get into the media game like Politico. What are you hearing about the Lincoln Project?
It seems to have kind of crash burned very dramatically. I will say that they were able to get tons of buzz for their amazing ads last year. And so that was, I'm sure it changed some people's minds, especially since they got millions of views on them on Twitter and online and on cable TV. But since there are political consultants involved, then of course there were people making money off them, and there was they didn't spend as much money as people thought they did on voter outreach, instead kind of getting commissions and all of that. And then John Weaver was preying on young employees and just young people in general, young boys. And so that I just don't see there's a future for Lincoln Project, since its brand is just trash right now. And so it's going to be very hard for them to rebuild. Of course, the Trump people were very excited about the downfall of LP.
So let's talk about Joe Biden. I think he's 30 days into his new administration. I'm still not fully convinced. All Americans know we have a new president. But that being said, President Biden did a town hall in Wisconsin with CNN, which I thought was okay. Went to Michigan to see the Pfizer plant there in Kalamazoo. What's your sense about these early trips, like Biden getting out there, making the case, trying to make the case, remind Americans that there is a new president? How's that succeeding?
I think it's going fairly well. You haven't had a foreign trip yet, which us who cover foreign policy, we always want to see. I think that they're trying to take the pandemic seriously, and they don't want to. Of course, Biden and his top team have been vaccinated, but they don't want to be having situations where people get coronavirus because of a trip, and so you don't want to have Secret Service and other folks, and so they're doing a lot of virtual meetings in the White House. They have sometimes people are in one office and then the next office, and they're just talking on video chat. And so I think they're trying to model good behavior for the last few months of the current phase of the pandemic. There's been stories about how the summer is going to be great, and so, but we just don't know yet. And I think they're trying to ramp up vaccines as much as possible, and that's been a point of criticism for them, because initially they were, setting low expectations, 100 million doses in 100 days, when that was what was already happening under Trump. And in the CNN town hall, he said there was no vaccine when he came into office, which is just not true. And so I think those are minor errors, but I think there is a sense that kind of responsible leadership is back, and expertise is very highly prized in this administration compared to the last one, which, of course, there are plenty of policy experts and smart people who are trying to serve the country, but they're overshadowed by a president and senior staff that was too often seen as not, taking it as seriously as they should.
Here at the Huddle, we focus on inner circle analysis, and Brett and I are going to do a deeper dive about this. But it does seem like Vice President Harris has a higher profile than we've seen, certainly with past vice presidents. Maybe even higher than Cheney. There's a lot of joint appearances. She spoke to Macron. What is your sense? Is it a unity government? Is it a Biden-Harris administration?
I think, you never really heard about the Trump-Pence administration as much. But the Biden-Harris administration is a phrase that you hear much more of. They won't admit it, but I think it's partly and largely because Biden is not likely to run again in 2024. And so Harris is the natural, leader in the Democratic Party. I'm sure there will be other Democrats who oppose her, but she is the front runner. And so they want to try to almost have her act as a co-president until then, and then she would basically run for re-election. And so that's, I think, one reason that they are putting her out in front as much as possible. And she's getting a lot more foreign policy experience. And I think they want to, it's always tough when there's a vice presidential role, because you don't really have much authority on your own. So it's basically, you're given as much authority and leadership from your boss, from the president, and then you just have to figure out what to do with it.
This is the last question. Is your sense, is the Capitol Hill still the place? Is it energy shifting to the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue with this new administration? Obviously, Speaker Pelosi's been in town for a long time, arguably one of the most gifted politicians that we've seen in a generation. AOC, you got Schumer, Mitch McConnell. What's your sense? Is the White House the power center, or is it shifting up the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue?
Feels like Joe Manchin is probably one of the most powerful people in Washington. So that kind of
whatever West Virginia wants should be the new mantra.
Seems like it. Both of them are power centers. The White House is still kind of the center of the federal government and the executive branch, obviously. But Joe Biden wants to try to get as much done on, via Congress as possible. And he doesn't want to, he's done a ton of executive orders in the first month, but there's limits to that. And there's lots of, he can't just allocate $1.9 trillion, and so Congress has the power of the purse. And so I think Congress is just, the place to go if you need something in this town still.
Well, Dan, that was great. That's Dan Lippman with Politico. You can find him. What's your Twitter handle? You're very prolific on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
D Lippman, DLIPPMAN.
Love it. And you're not on Clubhouse yet, I don't think.
I think I signed up, but I kind of got tired of it.
Well, maybe we'll see you on Clubhouse.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a great interview, Marc. I'm so glad to have people like Daniel come on the show and sharing their insight with our viewers. One more thing before we go. You know what it is. This week, who do you want in your huddle? Marc Ross.
So I'm going to go with Robert Kagan, who is an author, thought leader. He's with the Brookings Institute. He has written a new article in this current edition of Foreign Affairs, basically saying, hey, listen, America, you're a global power. Deal with it. And I think it's a really important message. Kagan famously was a Romney advisor in 2012, but also Obama found a lot of insights in his book, The World America Made. But he makes some great points. America is a superpower. We're a global power. We can't shirk our responsibility from being a part of the world. He's my inside the huddle person for the week. Brendan, how about you?
Well, Mark, I will tell you, when this plane was basically falling out of the sky in Denver, I thought maybe we would have the captain of that plane saving more than 200 people, nobody injured, nobody killed. I figured we were going to see another Tom Hanks movie like The Miracle on the Hudson. But with the inability to find the name of the captain, I'm actually going to go a different direction. I'm going to pick Daft Punk, who announced this week that they are retiring, so better get them in the huddle while I can. They made an announcement via video that after years and years together creating electronica music and some great hits, they're calling it quits, hanging up their helmets. I don't know, Mark. This is a bad time to want to take your mask off. I guess with Daft Punk, always trying to march to the beat of their own drummer.
So many puns, so little time. That's all we have for this week of The Huddle, your inner city analysis of what's happening in Washington, D.C., and also French pop music.